All right, so I am going to kind of read and give you a little bit of background and understanding of the first couple pages of The Great Gatsby by F Scott Fitzgerald. I'm hoping that you have this kind of split screen with the actual PDF on your iPad, and you should be on page 3. This is chapter 1 of The Great Gatsby. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. So, right away, we already get a little bit about our narrator, Nick, here. Um, this quote right here from his dad that I highlighted, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. I think that's really telling about Nick as a character because he has been brought up with advantages, probably money, probably wealth, probably status, some of those things that would put him ahead of other people during this time period. And so that gives us a little bit of insight that Nick is well to do and probably hangs out with well to do people, and his family's well to do. And so that's important for later on. So I would put a little note, a little sticky note there for that. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. So basically, what he's saying here is that he does not judge people right away. He does not judge a book by its cover, so to speak. And because of this, people open up to him. And sometimes he gets some really good information or gets some good insight into like the human mind. But he also says that sometimes he is the victim of some boring conversations and some boring people. So he's kind of got it both ways. He's like, this is kind of a curse and a blessing. My ability to reserve judgment, my ability to not judge people at least right away. And so he says here that he doesn't judge people. As you'll see here, maybe that's wrong. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person. And so it came about that in college I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently, I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. Just really quickly here. So basically, he says that in college he was accused of being a politician because he knew good information on all the people at his school. But he also says that most of these like secrets that he got were not sought by him. He did not want them, and he frequently faked sleep, being busy, or a hostile levity. That kind of means you joke about serious situations and serious topics. So when this happens, he kind of does all these things just to kind of get out of the conversation. Because he says down here the terms in which they express their secrets, their news, all that kind of stuff, is plagiaristic, is copy, is fake, and marred by obvious suppressions, meaning they're not telling the whole story. So basically, he's like, I hear these stories, but they're kind of cookie cutter. They're all the same, and they're not giving me all the details. They're only giving me what they really will want me to hear, kind of a thing, or it's from their own point of view, and so it's definitely not the full truth. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I am still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. So basically, he's saying here that one, him and his father are both kind of snobbish when it comes to reserving judgments, and two, just being a decent person and fundamental decencies was not distributed out unequally, or it is distributed out unequally at birth. It's that's what parceled means there, like a parcel, like a package. And after boasting this way of my tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. So we get a little bit of information here, not told in great detail, but we learn that one, Nick was out east, meaning like the East Coast, and two, he has come home. And when he came home, he says here, I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. He wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. So that's kind of a fancy way of saying, like, basically he learned too much about people and about their kind of human hearts and their human conditions and how they behave and how they act, kind of a thing. And it wasn't a good experience for him. He wants everything to be kind of uniform. He wants everything to kind of be the same now because he had a bad experience out east. With who or with what, we don't really know yet. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. So that's kind of a weird way of saying this. So Gatsby was exempt from this reaction, this kind of hatred for the East or for whatever happened in the East. But then he says here, Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have unaffected scorn. Scorn here means kind of things that you don't like, hatred, things you don't like. So he says that Gatsby was exempt from this, but Gatsby also represents everything he hates. So there's a little bit of like, well, that's kind of weird. Those two things don't necessarily go together. That makes Gatsby kind of mysterious here. As we'll keep reading, you'll see that Gatsby so far is mysterious. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability, which is dignified under the name of creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I never found in any other person, and which is not likely I shall ever find again. So basically, what he's saying here is that Gatsby had an extraordinary gift for hope and a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person. So Gatsby is a character that is full of hope, he says. Like so much hope, like almost too hopeful here. I think this next line here is very, very important. So I would at least highlight it as you are reading. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. So Gatsby himself was not a bad person, is what he's saying. He's saying that the thing that preyed on Gatsby, that foul dust that floated in the wake of his dreams, is what kind of turned Nick off from the people or the things or whatever it was out east. And now, if we see here, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams. So something preyed on Gatsby and preyed on Gatsby's dreams. We're not exactly sure what that is yet, But, we're talking about the American dream, so that's probably something to do with dreams right there. Just hint, hint. My family have been prominent, well to do people in this Middle Western city for 3 generations. Middle Western is Midwest, so like our neck of the woods. You'll see here later on, Minnesota is where they're from. Um, the Caraways are something of a clan, and we have a tradition that we're descended from the Dukes of Buccleuch. But the actual founder of my line was my grandfather's brother, who came here in 51, sent a substitute to the Civil War, and started the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. So, a little bit of background information right here. 51 means 1851. So, this takes place around 1922. That's when it was written. And so, basically, right there, that's saying that the grandfather's brother, so great uncle, came to America in 51, sent a substitute to the Civil War. Back in the day, if you were rich, you could pay a poor person to go fight in the war for you if you were called upon to go to war. So apparently this uncle was called upon in, 61 through 65, whenever it was, and paid someone else to go for him. So that means that they had money even to start with. And started the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. So it's a family business that's probably up earlier on the first page about how they've had, advantages that other people have not had. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him, with special reference to the rather hard-boiled painting that hangs in Father's office. I graduated from New Haven, that's in Connecticut, in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father. And a little later, I participated in the delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great War. This is World War One. Obviously, it wouldn't be called World War One then, because there was no World War Two, so they called it the Great War. I enjoyed the counter raid so thoroughly that I came back restless, meaning I was kind of bored. I wanted to do something. Instead of being the warm center of the world in the Middle West, now seemed like the ragged edge of the universe. So I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Basically, he said that the Midwest was kind of a cruddy place, and so he wanted to go to a bigger city, bigger area, which is the East. Back then, this is New York City kind of area, and the bond business was like bonds and stocks and those kind of things. Everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I suppose it could support one more single man. All my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me, and finally said, "Why, yes," with grave, hesitant faces. Father agreed to finance me for a year, and after various delays, I came east. Permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22. So he comes east in the spring of 1922. So that's kind of the start of our setting here, which is time and place. The practical thing was to find rooms in the city, but it was a warm season, and I had just left a country of wide lawns and friendly trees. So when a young man at the office suggested that we take a house together in a commuting town, it sounded like a great idea. It's like a suburb. He found the house, a weather-beaten cardboard bungalow, at $80 a month. But at the last minute, the firm ordered him to Washington, and I went out to the country alone. I had a dog, at least I had him for a few days until he ran away, and an old Dodge and a Finnish woman who made my bed and cooked breakfast and muttered Finnish wisdom to herself over the electric stove. So a couple things here. One, a beaten cardboard bungalow basically is like a really kind of small house, like a poor person house kind of a thing. But yet he's got an old Dodge, an old car, and he's got a Finnish woman to make it's like a maid or a housekeeper. So he's poor but rich. His dad's financing him, so he's got to live kind of modestly, but not really. It was lonely for a day or so until one morning some man more recently arrived than I stopped me on the road. "How do you get to West Egg Village?" he asked helplessly. I told him. And as I walked on, I was lonely no longer. I was a guide, a pathfinder, and original settler. He had casually conferred on me the freedom of the neighborhood. So basically, since he got to tell someone else where to go, he's like, oh, I'm now a part of this area. I'm a member of this community. And so, with the sunshine and the great burst of leaves growing on the trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. New life, new start for Nick here. There was so much to read for one thing, and so fine health to be pulled down out of young, breath-giving air. I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit and investment securities, and they stood on my shelf in red and gold like new money from the mint, promising to unfold the shining secrets that only Midas and Morgan and Miss Canis knew. Midas was King Midas, the Midas touch, everything you touch turns to gold kind of a person, okay? I was rather literary in college. Um, a lot of Fitzgerald's characters are literary in college. It's kind of annoying, but it's okay. One year, I wrote a series of very solemn and obvious editorials for the Yale News, and now I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again the most limited of all specialists, the well rounded man. This isn't just an epigram. Life is much more successfully looked at from a single window, after all. A couple things here. One, the well-rounded man, basically a jack of all trades, master of none kind of a thing, wants to be involved in a lot of things. So not just banking, but also writing here. In Nick's case here. And also, I think this is an interesting line because he's kind of saying that he can say all this stuff because he's looking back. He's looking out one window. And so there's kind of two narrators here. There's the Nick in the story, and then there's the Nick who has moved from the East and is retelling this story to us. And so be thinking about how a narrator might change some things or how they are in the story to make themselves look a little bit better because they don't want to, be a bad person in their character. They want to kind of distance themselves from what has happened. What has happened in the story, we don't know yet. It was a matter of chance that I should have rented a house in one of the strangest communities in North America. It was on that slender, riotous island which extends itself due east of New York and where there are, among other natural curiosities, two unusual formations of land. 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs, identical in contour and separated only by a courtesy bay, jut out into the most domesticated body of salt water in the Western Hemisphere, the great wet barnyard of Long Island Sound. They are not perfect ovals. Like the egg in the Columbus story, they are both crushed flat at the contact end, but their physical resemblance must be a source of perpetual confusion to the gulls that fly overhead. To the wingless, a more arresting phenomenon is their dissimilarity in every particular except shape and size. Okay, this is a really kind of fancy way for Fitzgerald to be saying basically there's these two kind of pieces of land that jut out from the bay, from like a bay of water. And they look identical in size and shape, those kinds of things. But that is where the similarities end. They're actually two completely different places, even though they look the same. Okay? I lived at West Egg, the less fashionable of the two. Though this is a most superficial tag to express the bizarre and not a little sinister contrast between them. The less fashionable side means like the worst part of town, or like the worst of the two. Like it's not as good as the other one. I think a good similarity is in town. When I moved here to Traer, I was told that I wanted to live on the school side of 63 and not the other side. Because that's the more fashionable side, quote unquote. It's got the new edition kind of a thing, even though my side's got Snob Hill, but whatever. Um, My house was at the very tip of the egg, only 50 yards from the sound, and squeezed between two huge places that rented for 12 or 15,000 a season. The one on my right was a colossal affair by any standard. It was a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side, spanking new under a thin beard of raw ivy, and a marble swimming pool, and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. It was Gatsby's mansion. Or rather, as I didn't know Mr. Gatsby, it was a mansion inhabited by a gentleman of that name. My own house was an eyesore, but it was a small eyesore, and had been overlooked, so I had a view of the water, a partial view of my neighbor's lawn, and the consoling proximity of millionaires, all for $80 a month. Remember, he's living in like a really kind of crappy house, like almost like a gardener's kind of a house for 80 a month, and his neighbors are renting their places for like 12,000 to 15,000, like for like the summer kind of a thing, or like a summer house than anything else. Across the Courtesy Bay, the white palaces of fashionable East Egg glittered along the water, and the history of the summer really begins on that evening I drove over there to have dinner with the Tom Buchanans. Daisy was my second cousin, once removed, and I'd known Tom in college. And just after the war, I spent 2 days with them in Chicago. All right, that's where I'm going to end this because I think the rest of this is pretty easy to understand now. Basically, you're going to have three new characters introduced to you. You're going to have Tom and Daisy Buchanan, and you're going to have Jordan. And so while you are reading, make sure that you are looking for the things that are on your sheet. Um, and later on, especially in the scene with Daisy and Nick, be looking at that conversation that they have. Okay? All right. Thanks for listening, guys.